10th of June 2023, and in this news flash I'm going to talk about the aftermath of that dam. And it's not really the full aftermath, it's just a few snippets. And as you can see, I've got my cap on. And there's a specific reason why I have this cap on. This cap is a reminder to you that my reporting is Russia biased. Why do I say that? Because every commentator has got some bias. There is no commentator in this world that can truly claim 100% unbiased. It's physically impossible. It is just not possible to be unbiased, totally unbiased. Yes, you can be objective, but you cannot be unbiased. Why is that? I think it's genetic for us to choose teams, to choose sides, to choose. We choose from very, very small. You are confronted with choices. And your choice can be complicated or can be simple. Do you like girls? Do you like boys? Do you want rugby? Do you like soccer? Always a choice. Very few people will be equally passionate about rugby and soccer. They will have bias. And this is what this report is about. Bias. But it is so important that you try and be objective and find the truth, no matter what your bias is. That is important, because that will make you feel comfortable with your interpretation of what is presented. Now, I don't care if you shout for the Springboks or for the Kiwis. That is your choice. But when the scoreboard comes up at the end of the game, you're a Kiwi supporter and the Springboks won, doesn't give you the right to tell the world the Kiwis won. That's bullshit. You cannot do that. You are still a Kiwi supporter, but you lost. And that's it. And amazingly enough, the vast majority of people understand that and they live with that. All of us has experienced cases where our teams has lost. But you do get those fanatics. They will tell you the scoreboard lies. And they are arrogant enough to expect you to believe them that the scoreboard is lying. Now, those that follow my channel, you would know, I've got this pet Zazi. It's Zazi Stalker of mine, and I've renamed him to Zazi Joiner. But fact of the matter is, he's a Zazi supporter. Unashamedly so. And I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem. But the problem comes when he's in denial of what the Zazis do. Then I get angry. So, usually, these Skidmarks of mine are short news discussions. But today is going to be a longer discussion, because I think there's a valuable lesson in here for all of us to learn. And please, while you listen to me, never forget my cap. So you must listen to me, and that filter of yours for Russian propaganda must be up, so that you make sure that you look at the facts and you don't listen to bullshit. Now, me and my Nazi stalker have got a love-hate relationship, and Many people has asked me, why don't you just block the guy? Because he terrorizes you. And I said, no. To me, he's a very good soundboard because he gives me an indication of how far and deep the bullshit propaganda has reached and penetrated. And that for me is an important parameter to have, so that when I present stuff, I am fully aware of the levels where these pre-programmed people are. We saw that during the pestilence, and we're seeing it now with the Ukraine war. And the thing is this, we can never hope for a society where the brainwashed is totally absent. It's impossible. They're amongst us. But this Zazi Stalker of mine, I know him for a long time on social media. I've never met him in person, and I would most probably also never meet him in person, because he's just the type of guy that I will never associate myself with. I avoid people like that like the plague. He's one of those, and all of us has somebody like that in our communities. This is a guy, the typical guy, if there's a bride tonight, he will be the most vocal and the loudest. And he is very opinionated. And his opinion is flung out at the top of his voice. And it is preached as if it is the gospel. And if you dare to differ from him, he becomes angry and abusive and many times violent. Because in his bird brain, there is no room for recognition that people may differ from him. That characters, all of us know people like that. And if you should dare to oppose him in a statement that he makes, he will be very abusive, and while you're talking, he will be throwing interjections, sometimes rude ones, sometimes ridiculous ones, and all the time as he speaks, his eyes goes from left to right to find supporters in the crowd. And believe me, he does get people that visually looks as if they are supporting him. Those people are normally people that doesn't have a choice, because they're either his family or a colleague or a neighbor. So they will stand there and they will nod their heads as he looks at them, because they fear him. Because these types of guys are undisputed bullies. I call them brandewyn bullies, brandy bullies. Because the more brandy he has in him, and the fuller his glass is, the refill is, the more aggressive he gets. Now, unfortunately for my pet Zazi, I grew up as the smallest and the youngest in the class. I grew up on the coal mines, which was the Wild West, and I have been subjected to bullying my whole life. But, as I said previously in a Skidmark, to be the subject of a bullying normally has one of two outcomes. Either the bullied person is trashed into a place where he is mentally, basically ruined, or that person that is bullied fights back. Now, all of us in South Africa knows fox terrier dogs. Those things are small little things, but they'll tackle everything. They'll go for Alsatian, they'll go for a Boerboel, they go for a Rottweiler, they go for everything. And that is what happens when people are bullied. They fight back like a fox terrier, or they tuck their tails in and run away, yelping like a poodle. And this is the reality. Now, unfortunately for my Zazi Stalker, I'm a fox terrier. And I grew up, I'm no longer a little fox terrier. I'm a little bit bigger now. But about a week ago, I made this remark. He said to me, the counter-offensive is baie goed beplan en hulle sou bote gebruik, nou kan hulle nie meer nie. In short, he's saying that the counter-offensive was well planned and they would have used boats. That's the Ukrainians would use boats across the deeper river to get to the Russians, but now with the dam all blown up, they cannot. My response to him is, ek en jy het regtig niks om vir mekaar te sê nie. Die is baie soos 'n abusive marriage. Ek is klaar met dit. In English, I told him that me and him has got nothing to say to each other because it is looking like an abusive marriage, an abusive relationship. All of us know examples of that. And I said, this is like an abusive marriage. I'm done. And his immediate response is, jy sê elke keer so as jy in 'n hoek vasgekeer is en nie kan antwoord nie. You always say this when you're cornered and you can't answer. And in that statement of his, you must read the arrogance in there. Because he automatically assumes that everything that he says is true. And I cannot answer on his truth. This is how these types of bullies work. They have got this arrogance in them that makes them believe that all they say is the truth. That is why they are also so abusive in social gatherings and opinionated and always very loud. Because they believe, they absolutely believe they're always correct. In my young days, I had a mentor that prepared me for interrogations of really bad people. And he said something to me that has stuck with me for my whole life. He said to me, you must understand one thing. If you take a person into interrogation, these dangerous guys, you sit down at the table and you start asking him stupid questions. Ask him, how old are you? When were you born? Where were you born? Are you married? Do you love your wife? Do you cheat on your wife? Do you have children? Do you want children? You are a man, aren't you? Do you like men or do you like women? Questions like that. And you ask him, where were you born? You ask him questions that he assumes you should know the answers to. And he jumps to the conclusion that you are stupid. And then his ego will take over. He is going to try and inform you, to try and get you informed. And he is going to tell you everything that you want to know, and a shitload more. The moment that he starts talking, just shut up. Just shut up. Light a cigarette, relax and listen. Make sure the tape recorder is running. Because his ego is going to force him to tell you exactly what he did. Because he's looking for recognition. He's looking for confirmation. Just shut up. And I'm not going to elaborate on my history, but I was a fucking good interrogator. I told this Zazi one night that if I've got you in a small interrogation room, I'll ask you 3 questions and I'll shut up. And after that, there won't be the need for a court case. You will go directly to jail. Because you will send yourself to jail. But in any case, So this is where this thing was. I said to him, I'm done. And I stepped away. And lo and behold, listen to this. He shows me a link to a video of Joe Bro. Now, Joe Bro, I've talked about bias. That guy is a pure, thoroughbred Ukraine propaganda spreader. That's what he is. He shoots down people like the Duran, like Judge Napolitano, like Colonel McGregor, like Scott Ritter, like Robert Barnes, all of those people, all of them is bullshitters, propagandists, and idiots. This is the guy. So, my Zazi Stalker makes this post. As jy die video van Jake Brou kan luister en vir my kan sê dat jy niks voel nie en hy kak praat, dan is jy 'n hartelose bliksem. So in short, he says, if I can listen to Joe Brou and feel nothing, I'm a heartless bastard. And he forwards me a video from Joe Brou on the aftermath of the dam wall. And he makes the following statement. Op hierdie oomblik hardloop die hele Ukrainse bevolking rond om mense en diere te red. Ambulanse, brandweerwaens en tragiese reddings van kinders. Kan ek vir jou die tragiese video stuur? Wys jy my een video van die Russe wat mense red en ontruim? Hulle los hulle oor aan hulle eie genade. Hulle skiet nog op die reddingswerkers. Jy antwoord nie my vraag nie, stuur my 'n video. In short, he says that the Ukrainians are frantically trying to save the people, and while they're doing the salvaging, the Russians are shooting at them. I just read that and I said nothing. No response. And then he immediately follows up and he says, ek het mos lankal voorspel dat die tyd gaan kom dat jy gaan weghardloop vir al die kak wat jy so onbedag kwytraak. Ek dink ons is nou daar, ou maat. Jou grootste fout is dat jy iets soek om iemand by te kom. So he says in short that he has predicted that it will reach the point that I'm going to run away from all the shit that I'm talking. And this is the video that he posted. Watch. Civilians fired at while fleeing Novakhovka Dam floods in Ukraine. Emergency services in Kherson have come under Russian shell fire as they rescue civilians who are trying to escape from Kherson. That's the video that he refers me to. And he gives me a link to this one. The Novakhovka hydroelectric power plant has been destroyed by the Russians. The destruction of this dam is the largest global ecological disaster since Fukushima. And he adds this. Op hierdie oomblik hardloop die hele Ukrainse bevolking om mense en diere te red. Ambulanse en brandweerwaens en tragiese reddings van kinders. And he carries on about how the Ukrainians are struggling to save the people and how the Russians are shooting at the rescuers. And he refers to me in a video, and I'm showing you the face of Joe Brou. Look at that face. The only thing that is short here is tears and snot coming. That's all that's needed to make the picture perfect. This is my pet Zazi's primary source of information. Primary. And lo and behold, look at this. The militants of the Kiev regime committed a heinous crime today. They fired at the evacuation point for civilians in Golia-Pristan. 2 people died, including a 33-year-old pregnant woman, 2 more people are injured and are being taken to the hospital. The shelling was precisely intentional. Non-humans fired specifically at civilians. And this is from Slavyangrad, one of the most reliable sources of information on that war. And I will not say they're unbiased, but they have got a team of reporters on that channel. And in that mixture, they retain a very good balance. A very good balance. And then, lo and behold, look at this. Young Ukrainian boy rescuing his dog from drowning after the Russians destroyed the Kharkovka dam today, and everybody pisses about this poor little boy struggling to save his dog. Oh shit! What do we have here? Serbia floods, little kid saving his dog. 9 years ago. And my Zazi Stalker, in his little goldfish bowl, was eating this little boy that was drowning in the river in Ukraine. And he did not expect this one to come. This is in Serbia. So this little boy is actually a time traveler. 9 years ago, he was in Serbia, rescuing his dog. And yesterday, he was in Ukraine, rescuing the same dog. He did not age 1 second, and neither did the dog. The goldfish feeding. And watch what we have here. The propaganda channels are showing rescue scenes in the flooded areas of Kherson. Just one problem. They forgot to blur out the text on the rescuers' uniforms. Emercon, Russia. These are Russian rescuers helping people on the left bank. Will Joe Burrow take note of that? No, he will not. Because if he does, there's a fucking lot of goldfish that's going to die in their bowls. This is the shit that all of us are dealing with every day. But it's not the end. Remember what I told you about the interrogation? You must just shut up and listen. Here he comes. Vreeslike westerse propaganda. Kan jy dit nie glo nie? And laughing smiley. Making out everything as Western propaganda. And then he says, "Ai Colleen, hoe is jy nou so stil? Maak 'n bietjie vir ons 'n skietmaak oor hoe Rusland die Oekraïne opvok." Ek dink al wat vir jou nou oorbly is om ons te vertel hoe Rusland die wêreld gaan verwoes met nukes. He says to me, "Colleen, why are you so quiet? Please make a skietmaak on how Russia is fucking up the Ukraine." Now, I usually don't take requests, but in this one, I thought, let me oblige. So I gave him this one. For the first time, detailed footage appeared with a German Leopard destroyed during an attempted offensive by the armed forces of Ukraine. Moreover, the latest modification is 2A6. Aviation and artillery of the Vostok Group worked on Ukrainian armored vehicles in the Oreskovsky direction. The footage also shows the American Bradley M2A2 infantry fighting vehicles and an armored recovery vehicle. And here's a close-up. Look at that. Look at that. And all I'm going to say is that is Ukrainian vehicles. And now I'm going to take my cap off. I think it has served its purpose. The reality is we're looking at real shit here. And here is more. Look at that. There's a lot of vehicles destroyed there. And look at this. And then we get to this. And in here you must take note of that tank. Take note of those crosses on that tank. Doesn't that remind you of something? Because it reminds me of the German tanks that the Nazis were using. Looked a hell of a lot similar to this. That insignia tells the story. Based on the results of the 5 days of the Ukrainian counteroffensive, it can be stated that the fierce battles continue in the Zaporizhzhia region. During the fighting, at least 8,000 APU servicemen, 12 Leopard 2 and T-72 tanks, 15 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, and at least 150 armored vehicles were killed. Probably the figures for the loss of the armored vehicles are higher and amount to at least 300 to 350 units. Now, this is from the Telegram channel Infant Militario. These guys only report on the military hardware casualties of both sides. So, but contrary to my Zazi Stalker, I don't make just statements and statements. When I give you snippets, I try to always include the reference so that you can check on yourself and you can come back and tell me in the comments, hey listen, you talk shit here. But let's continue. Fighting frequently occurs between assault teams and infantry units attempting to cross minefields with Russian infantry and anti-tank units at the forefront and tanks supporting them from behind. Instant air and artillery support for Russian troops under the control of UAVs is constantly increasing. On the video, the Leopard 2A4 is in the Zaporizhzhia region. Now, he asked me sarcastically to tell him how the Russians are beating the Ukrainians. Where the contrary is the truth. The Ukrainians are being mauled by the Russian meat grinder. And I read a very interesting article in which a guy explained why the Ukrainians are being mauled. And he said he blames it on the Kiev and Washington propaganda machines because they're giving these soldiers of Ukraine all the propaganda bullshit, and that fills them with false bravado, and then they storm blindly towards the front lines, and they are getting absolutely brutalized. Now there's something else that is important. That propaganda is also affecting the wives and family of these soldiers. They sit at home and they read how Ukraine is winning and how Ukraine has got the upper hand. And then their family member comes back in a wooden box. And they got to ask themselves, how the fuck did this happen? I thought we were winning. But let's end that part of this program with this meme, which is actually brutally humorous. That Azov Ukrainian team says, "You said Leopard tanks were the best in the world." And the German cat responds, "Not in open field without air support." Ha! That is the reality. Sometimes these memes can be so cruel but so true. And now I'm going to show you something else about the Russians. And before I show it, I want to give you this little piece of information, and I owe Alexander from the Duran for that analysis, and that references that I showed you earlier about that kid that can do time travel. I owe that to Alex of the Duran. Now, a while back, all of us that watch these things can remember the very well published Kharkiv offensive, where the Ukrainians took kilometers and kilometers and kilometers of land back from the Russians. What the Western propaganda machines didn't tell you is that the Russians had already withdrawn. General Armageddon was giving those instructions for the Russians to withdraw, because his main aim was to stabilize the front line, and that front line is long. And in the Kherson region, the Russian soldiers were paratroopers. So they were very lightly equipped. They have to be, otherwise they can't be parachuted in. And they fell back, although they are some of the best soldiers in the Russian army. They could not withstand that onslaught. They would never have survived that offensive, because they were only about 65 men. So they fell back. And that was a wise move. So the Ukrainians actually did not win back the territory. They just walked back into territory vacated by the Russians. But the propaganda machine gave that a hell of a lot of air, and it pumped them full of confidence they can win the Russians. And now we get back to Kherson, and those Ukrainian soldiers, pumped full of that bullshit, is storming the Russian defenses. And what happens? They run into layers and layers of minefields and trenches and reinforced embankments and dug in artillery support, and they are being slaughtered. And add into that the Russian air support, helicopters and bombers. It is absolutely horrendous what's happening there. And I don't want to jubilate about killing so many people, but they are slaughtering the Ukrainians and they are trashing their equipment. Hell of a numbers. Look at the numbers that I read to you now about the amount of tanks and armored vehicles that was destroyed. He said killed, but destroyed. And you must remember, all those things are donations from the West. Western taxpayers paid for that shit. And those things are destroyed by the tons. Look at this. This is the Russian helicopter that is active there in the Kherson area. These are the choppers that the Russians are using there. The Ka-52 Alligator set a record for repelling missiles in the SMO zone. In total, 18 anti-aircraft missiles were reflected in one sortie. The Russian attack helicopters, Ka-52, repelled a record number of anti-aircraft missiles during the flight with the help of the Vitebsk complex. Today, the record for reflected missiles of man-portable anti-aircraft missile systems in flight is 18 pieces. One of the Russian Ka-52s was able to deflect such a number during a sortie due to the Vitebsk airborne defense system. That is why helicopter pilots call the complex Vitebsk eggs of life. The external equipment of the complex protruding from the body of the helicopter looks like bird eggs. And the complex itself regularly saves the lives of Army aviation pilots, whom the enemy constantly fires from manpads. The helicopter returned to the base without damage, the agency's interlocutor said. And this is from Telegram, from a channel War Donbass. These guys talk about the equipment and they give you the facts. Now, my Zazi Stalker or Zazi joiner, in his mind, he is convinced that Russia will be destroyed in the Ukraine. Now, if you are a guy or a girl capable of objective, logical thinking, ask yourself, the biggest nuclear army in the world, the biggest, highly technical developed, very up to date with their armament systems and weapons, is confronted by a military of a nation that has got about 1/5 of the population of Russia before the war. But you are of the opinion that small nation can win against Russia. And the thing that must make everybody in the West very nervous is that no matter what the press is trying to tell you, the weaponry deployed against the Russians in the Ukraine is NATO weaponry. They pushed with very reluctantly, they pushed that so-called game changer Patriot systems in, and the Russians destroyed them. They deployed some of their guided missiles and drones and things against the Russians, and the Russians destroy those things, plus the Russians disable those things remotely. So if you look at it objectively of what is going on weapon against weapon, the West is not a match for the Russians. Some weapons the West brings in there, and for a week or so they seem to be having the advantage, and then all of a sudden out of the blue that weapon fails. Either gets shot down or it just navigation fails or something. And you don't hear a word about that in the press. But I'm going to step off that. In my mind, this is just a matter of time. And I read another article which was quite interesting, and maybe you should take note of it. And the commentator said that Putin is playing with the West in the Ukraine. The Russian population wants Putin to blow the Ukraine off the map. And if Russia really unleashed the full extent of its war machine on the Ukraine, it would have sorted that whole Ukraine out in a matter of 2 months. But they don't do it. They are fighting slowly and carefully, grinding up the Ukrainian forces and machines. And most of the fighting is done by the Wagner PMC, by Ramzan Kadyrov's Chechens, and by the Donbass militia, with assistance from the Russian troops. So what you have to ask yourself is, where is that 300,000 plus soldiers that were mobilized for the Ukrainian war? Now, the reality is, those soldiers are sitting in the back lines, just giving back-end support. Why are they not actively fighting? This is the reason why. The Russians are aware of the desperation in NATO, and the NATO equipment is no longer cutting it. The Russians are trashing that equipment. The Ukrainians are running out of manpower, and the Russians are alert for the moment that NATO put boots on the ground in Ukraine. Then that 300,000 will be unleashed, and most probably will get more reinforcements out of the regular Russian army. So I hope that somewhere in the West a voice of sanity can come up that preaches peace instead of more weapons, more money. I hope you enjoyed this. I'm going to leave you with this picture of that Ka-52 helicopter in flight. That machine is deadly. And as I've read to you, in one sortie, avoided 18 shoulder-launched missiles. Think about that. Well, this Saturday, we all suffer from load shedding and all that crap. But I hope you can use this video as an indication of how to handle your pet Zazis. Please give me a like and a subscribe and share the thing. And remember, it's Saturday. Have a braai.